John Hinckley Jr. has been granted unconditional release. How can we forget the 1911 attempted murder on the American president? He was released after spending 41 years, 2 months, and 15 days in prison. Celebrity Gossip is your #1 YouTube channel for the latest celebrity news, so relax as we take you on a journey into the world of John Hinckley. Hinckley, who in 1981 shot and wounded US President Ronald Reagan, has been freed from prison on June 15th from court oversight, officially concluding decades of supervision by legal and mental health professionals. After 41 years, 2 months, and 15 days, freedom at last, he wrote on Twitter shortly after noon on Wednesday. This lifting of all restrictions has been expected since late September. U.S. District Court Judge Paul L. Friedman in Washington had said that he would free Hinckley on the 15th of June if he continued to remain mentally stable in the community in Virginia where he was living since 2016. Hinckley, who was acquitted of trying to kill the then U.S. president by reason of insanity, has spent the decades before that in a Washington mental hospital. Hinckley has gained nearly 30,000 followers on Twitter and YouTube recently as the judge loosened Hinckley's restrictions before fully lifting all of them. But the already 67-year-old is far from being the household name that he became after he shot and wounded the 40th US president and several others outside of a Washington hotel. History has it that Hinckley is, at best, a question on a quiz show and someone who unintentionally helped build the Reagan legend and inspire a push for stricter gun control. If Hinckley had succeeded in killing Reagan, then he would have been a pivotal historical figure. As it is, he is a misguided soul whom history has already forgotten. H.W. Brand, a historian and Reagan biographer, wrote in an email to the Associated Press. According to Barbara A. Perry, a professor and director of presidential studies at the University of Virginia's Miller Center, Hinckley would maybe be a Jeopardy question, but his impact remains tangible in Reagan's legacy. For the president himself to have been so seriously wounded and to come back from that actually made Ronald Reagan the legend that he became, like the movie hero that he was, Perry continued. President Reagan showed grace and humor in the face of death, Perry said. After being shot, the president told emergency room doctors that he hoped that they were all Republicans. He later joked to his wife, Nancy, that he was sorry that he forgot to duck. When the president later addressed the Congress after the shooting, he looked just a little bit thinner, but he's still the robust cowboy that Ronald Reagan is, Perry said. The assassination attempt left Reagan's press secretary, James Brady, paralyzed, who later died in 2014. And in 1993, President Bill Clinton signed into law the Brady Bill, which required a 5-day waiting period for handgun purchases and background checks of prospective buyers. The Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence and the Brady Center to Prevent Gun Violence are named after Brady and his wife Sarah. The shooting also injured Secret Service agent Timothy McCarthy, as well as Washington police officer Thomas Delahanty. Hinckley was 25 at the time of the attack and was suffering from acute psychosis. When jurors found him not guilty by reason of insanity, they concluded he needed treatment and not a lifetime in confinement. He was ordered to live at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington. In the 2000s, Hinckley began making visits to his parents' home in a gated community in Williamsburg. A 2016 court order granted him permission to live with his mother full-time, albeit under various restrictions after experts said that his mental illness had been in remission for decades. In July 2000, Hinckley's mother died. Hinckley signed a lease on a 1-bedroom apartment in the area last year and began living there with his cat, Theo, according to court filings. Because of this incident, the court restricted Hinckley from owning a gun or using drugs or alcohol over the years. He also couldn't contact actor Jodie Foster, with whom he was obsessed with at the time of the shooting, or any of his victims or their families. John Warnock Hinckley Jr. was born on May 29, 1955 in Ardmore, Oklahoma, but later moved with his wealthy family to Dallas, Texas at the age of 4. His father was John Warnock Hinckley, chairman and president of the Vanderbilt Energy Corporation, while his mother was Joanne Hinckley, née Moore, December 7, 1925 through July 30, 2021. Hinckley grew up in University Park, Texas, and attended Highland Park High School in Dallas County. After Hinckley graduated from high school in 1974, his family, owners of the Hinckley Oil Company, moved to Evergreen, Colorado, where the new company headquarters was located. He was an off-and-on student at Texas Tech University from 1974 to 1980, but eventually dropped out. In 1975, he went to Los Angeles in the hope of becoming a songwriter, but his efforts were unsuccessful, which prompted him to write to his parents with tales of misfortune and pleas for money. He also spoke of a girlfriend, Lynn Collins, who turned out to be a fabrication. In September 1976, Hinckley, like the prodigal son, returned to his parents' home in Evergreen. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, Hinckley began purchasing weapons and practicing with them. He was prescribed antidepressants and tranquilizers to deal with his emotional problems. At a point, Hinckley became obsessed with the 1976 film Taxi Driver, in which disturbed protagonist Travis Bickle, Robert De Niro, plots to assassinate a presidential candidate. Bickle was partly based on the diaries of Arthur Bremer, who attempted to assassinate George Wallace. Hinckley developed an infatuation with Jodie Foster, who played a sexually trafficked 12-year-old child, Iris Stiesma, in the film. When Jodie started school at Yale University, Hinckley moved to New Haven, Connecticut for a short time so that he could stalk her. There, he sent Foster love letters and romantic poems and repeatedly called and left her messages. When he failed to develop any meaningful contact with Foster, Hinckley fantasized about conducting an aircraft hijacking or killing himself in front of her to get her attention. Finally, he settled on a scheme to impress her by assassinating the president. He went to the extreme in a bid to impress her, thinking that by achieving a place in history, he would appeal to her as an equal. Hinckley trailed President Jimmy Carter from state to state and was arrested in Nashville, Tennessee on a firearms charge. Penniless, he returned home. Despite receiving psychiatric treatment for depression, it did not improve his mental state. Hinckley began to target the newly elected President Ronald Reagan in 1981. For this purpose, he collected material on the assassination of John F. Kennedy. On March 30th, 1981, at exactly 2:27 p.m. EST, Hinckley shot a .22 caliber ROM RG-14 revolver 6 times at Reagan as he left the Hilton Hotel in Washington, D.C., after the president addressed an AFL-CIO conference. Hinckley got the police officer Thomas Delahanty badly wounded, and the same with Secret Service agent Timothy McCarthy, and critically wounded press secretary James Brady. Though Hinckley did not hit Reagan directly, the president was seriously wounded when a bullet ricocheted off the side of the presidential limousine and hit him in the chest. Alfred Antonucci, a Cleveland, Ohio labor official who stood near Hinckley and saw him firing, gave Hinckley a hard hit on the head and pulled him to the ground. Within 2 seconds, Agent Dennis McCarthy, no relation to Agent Timothy McCarthy, dived onto Hinckley, intent on protecting Hinckley and to avoid what happened to Lee Harvey Oswald, who was killed before he could be tried for the assassination of President Kennedy. Another Cleveland area labor official, Frank J. McNamara, joined Antonucci and started punching Hinckley in the head, striking him so hard he started bleeding. Brady had been shot by Hinckley in the right side of the head and endured a long recuperation period, remaining paralyzed on the left side of his body until his death on August 4, 2014. Brady's death was ruled a homicide 33 years later after the shooting. At his 1982 trial in Washington, D.C., having been charged with 13 offenses, Hinckley was found not guilty by reason of insanity on June 21st. The defense psychiatric reports portrayed him as insane, while the prosecution reports characterized him as legally sane. Hinckley was therefore transferred into psychiatric care from Bureau of Prisons custody on August 18, 1981. Soon after his trial, Hinckley wrote that the shooting was the greatest love offering in the history of the world and was disappointed that Foster did not reciprocate his love. He was so obsessed with someone he doesn't even know he exists. The verdict resulted in widespread dismay. You can't say a man who deliberately made an attempt to murder the president is insane. As a consequence, the United States Congress and a number of states revised laws governing when a defendant may use the insanity defense in a criminal prosecution. Idaho, Montana, and Utah abolished the defense altogether. In the United States, before the Hinckley case, the insanity defense had been used in less than 2% of all felony cases and was unsuccessful in almost 75% of those trials. Public outcry over the verdict led to the Insanity Defense Reform Act of 1984, which altered the rules for consideration of mental illness of defendants in federal criminal court proceedings. In 1985, Hinckley's parents wrote Breaking Points, a book detailing their son's mental condition. Least for the masses, they would have asked that Hinckley be brought out and beaten to death. He has been freed, but I think he should be given a more severe punishment. You can drop your thoughts and comments in the section below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more interesting videos. Thanks.